Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels, where we talk about the art and culture of running an indie record label. I'm your host, Scott Orr. Thank you so much for joining me as we have a new episode today talking with the incredible Secretly Group, and we're going to get into that in a second. You remember a couple episodes ago, I was talking about just the incredible fact that today or this week or this month, somewhere in the world, there was a record label starting who in 5 or 10 years from now would be this big iconic record label. I mean, it's just a hypothetical, but it's just an incredible thing to think about as we grow this community and as I discover more and more people who are thinking about starting a record label, who have just started a record label in 2020 or have been running a record label for a really long time. I wanted to share with you this email I got, and I've mentioned before, I really do get like a lot of emails from you guys, and it's so exciting to hear about all of the different stages and dreams that where people are at with their label. It's so exciting. But here's one I got from a guy named Jim, and I asked him if I could share this, but I'll read you just a portion of it that I thought was really cool. He just got into the podcast with the Jaguar episode, and then he says, I started a tiny label back in 2010 to help out my local scene in the UK. Life took hold around 2014, and aside from a few releases, it's been mostly dormant since then. Listening to the podcast has inspired me to regroup and get back in the game. So I just wanted to say thanks for reminding me how fun it can be to run a label. That was, that was incredible. Waking up to an email like that is such a cool thing. And like I said, there's so many people at so many different stages of this running or starting a record label. And it's so great to hear of someone who has a 10-year-old label. And, you know, we get so hyped and so excited about starting a label, and then life takes hold, like Jim says. And then things just kind of slow down, but then there's seasons where they pick back up again. So I'm so excited that for Jim and his label, and hopefully in 10 years from now, it'll be this huge, iconic label. And he won't even return my calls. Anyhow, today's, speaking of huge, iconic labels, we're talking with Secretly. Oh, before I get to that, I do want to mention, if you are this person who is trying to revitalize your 10-year-old label, or you're someone who wants to start a label and doesn't know where to start, I have collected some resources, and we're getting more, but we've collected some resources for people like you at otherrecordlabels.com. Heck, it's for everybody. So go to otherrecordlabels.com, and we have a checklist on how to start a record label that you can download for free, as well as a guide from some of the labels that we've spoke to over the years. And you can get that all at otherrecordlabels.com. A couple weeks ago, we talked with Jaguar Records. They are a part of this group called Secretly Group, and it is like a kind of a group of labels that have come together under one roof called Secretly Group, and there are labels like Dead Oceans and Jaguar and Secretly Canadian and the Numero Group, and I think that I got that label name right. Anyway, and then at the time of recording this, we recorded this early in the spring of 2020, and it was honestly like a couple weeks before it was announced that Ghostly International, who we've also had on the show, who's an incredible label, are now coming under that umbrella as well. They share resources. People don't get laid off. It's a really cool thing. So now Ghostly, and that was a shock to me, and of course the guys didn't let on when I was talking with them. But here I'm talking with Darius and Chris from Secretly Group. I hope you enjoy this interview. Just a heads up, this is like a conference call that spans across the entire continent, so there might be a little bit of a delay. We're going to roll. Let me ask you, I'll just go ahead and ask you, and then you guys can, whoever wants to take the answer it's totally up to you. But I like doing some research and kind of going over the label and the labels, and I kind of assume that when you reach a certain level in your field, that as an individual, like all self-doubt and insecurity goes away. Is that true? Like, does the imposter syndrome dissipate over time?
No, I haven't come to that time yet. We still feel like imposters.
Really? That's too bad.
Yeah, truly.
Really? Oh, man.
Well, no, I think not only does it not dissipate, but you also, your goals become elastic. And so
you move the goalpost.
You start to become an imposter in new arenas.
Oh, well, I guess that's encouraging. It's discouraging in a way, but it's also good to know that we should all just kind of give up the chase of trying, That's great.
Feeling like you arrived, you never arrived.
Right.
There's no arrival. Ever.
This is a short interview. I think people have already turned off. Let's go to the history. In my interview with Eric, we talked about Jaguar, and he gave us a bit of a history on how the label got started. Can you help fill in some of the gaps and let us know how these three labels came together?
And really, really quick. This is a podcast, right?
That's
is this
correct.
A recording, or is it more? Are you transcribing? Okay.
No, yeah. This is a podcast, and it will be like long form as the conversation goes, unless there's something you want me to take out.
Okay.
Okay. Good to know.
So,
Darius, do you want to start?
Yeah. I'll just, I think parallel histories. Roughly in 95, 96, Jaguar and Secret the Canadian started at the same time and had no relationship with each other. Jaguar, as Eric shared with you, started in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I was the one who started it, and I had multiple jobs at the time. I was sort of in denial of dropping out of college. And at the same time, and Chris, you should share how it started. Secret the Canadian started in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, the same story. I mean, it was like we started secretly. We were all either going to college or working at the college. Myself, my brother Ben, and friends Eric and Jonathan. And we were all deeply involved in music culture, either as fans, but also we were promoting shows. We were very active at college radio, and we were trying to find ways to get involved in the process more deeply, similar to Darius. And we took a leap. We pulled some money, and we put out a few releases, and around the same time that Darius did, and we became aware of one another. I heard your music, Darius, through a mutual friend who was playing a lot of your music at the local community radio, and a few of your bands were traveling through Bloomington, and I was fans of those bands, and we became friends. And then we started, when Secretly started to distribute other record labels, there were 4 partners in Secretly. We had a lot of manpower, and we were trying to find ways to get distributors to give us more bandwidth. And the fastest track that we could find for that was to have more new releases. So we reached out to Darius and said, "Hey, would you like for us to be your sales force? And we'll distribute your albums globally as we develop our international distribution infrastructure." And he jumped at that, and that gave us an opportunity to get to work together professionally. And I think from there, after doing that for a few years and many late night phone calls and just kind of daydreaming sessions about how to build a company from the ground up, Darius and I became close and aligned on a lot of issues, and the topic came up for. Yeah,
he talked me into moving to Bloomington, Indiana. So that was, in many ways, like Chris was describing, Secret the Canadian, maybe as a product of just a greater number of partners, but also I would say just more courage. Secret the Canadian had developed its business at a faster clip than Jaguar had. Yes. I was a one-person shop at the time, and Secret the Canadian was Eric and Jonathan and Ben and Chris, and they were thinking ahead about distribution. This is pre-digital. This is only when really at a time in the 90s when really it's all about compact discs. I mean, there was some vinyl, but it was really mostly about compact disc sales.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, I think also, Chris, one part of our connection was, I booked the most horrible tour for the Curious Digit. They played Second Story in Bloomington. The promoter was your housemate. They crashed at your place, and there's a connection there. And then also, from that, we started talking, and, then you were on tour with Songs of Ohio with Jason Molina, and I was the promoter in Charlottesville, and we met in person then. And so it just started from there, and then lots of late night phone calls, lots of kvetching about production and stuff like that.
When you're thinking about coming together, and now that there's 3 labels and there's a group, why not start a new label with a brand new name and amalgamate everybody?
I think we were pretty attached to the labels that we were growing. They were our babies,
Sure.
They in hindsight, you look back, I was like, oh, there were only like maybe 8 releases on Jaguar at the time, or that had been envisioned. And on Secretly, maybe only 11. But they were our babies. We put a lot of creativity into them. We were very precious. Everything we did was imbued with a boatload of righteousness and passion and poetry. In hindsight, we look back and it's probably slightly foolish, but I think it's actually important to be so kind of deep in your own mythological waters in those early days.
So now, do you view them, all 3 labels, as having their own individual voice or aesthetic? Asking about today.
They still are distinct from each other. I'm not sure exactly how they have maintained that distinctiveness, but we still think of the 3 labels as 3 different labels. And I should also say, the short history we gave you of Secret Canadian and Jaguar, sort of becoming close. Very early on there, just to fill in the history gaps. At some point, Chris said, "Hey, I'll become your partner," because him and I were talking about him becoming a co-equal with me as partners in Jaguar. And he said, "Yes, but you have to move to Bloomington." And so I moved to Bloomington, and then there was this time early on when Secret the Canadian was 4 individuals owning it, and Jaguar 2 individuals owning it, and there's only overlap with Chris. And that was a very natural way for each of the labels to sort of keep their own voice, because there were different decision makers on either side, except for Chris being common to both. And then over time, that changed and morphed, and now it's the same ownership between Secret the Canadian and Jaguar. And 2 of the Secret the Canadian partners decided to pursue other endeavors, and so it just became Ben and Chris Swanson. Now it's Ben Swanson, Chris Swanson, and myself, who are 3 owners of both Secret the Canadian and Jaguar, and we've also invited Phil Waldorf to be our partner too in those 2 labels. And he is someone we started Dead Oceans with, I think roughly, was it 2006, Chris, or 2007?
2007, yeah.
Yeah, 2007. So, Jaguar and Secret the Canadian were sort of brothers, sisters to each other. Over time, the ownership became common, but it was in 2007 that Dead Oceans was born with a 4th partner, Phil Waldorf. And now, currently, Phil Waldorf, Ben Swanson, Chris Swanson, and myself, we are the 4 owners of the 3 labels. Dead Oceans, Jaguar, and Secret Canadian.
There's a little bit of...
We're all like very involved in all 3 labels.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's changed from the beginning phase to the later phase. Like the beginning phase, there was more of different tribes.
I see.
Now, as far as the ownership, it's one group of us, and we're relying more and more on emerging leaders within our company to help keep the distinctive
That's great.
cultural flavors of each of the labels.
I want to ask. There's like, from my perspective, there's a little bit of an intimidation factor when you have this group of companies. Are you conscious about maintaining an indie ethos? Like, how do you not become big sellouts?
That's really important to us.
Yeah.
I think we don't want to be big for big sake.
Okay.
We never thought that, the best way to make a cultural impact in this world, whether it's in music or other areas, was to just be Disney or be massive. We felt it was more interesting to contribute to culture from small and medium-sized company perspectives, where we're close to working on the level with artists. But we also know that unless you pay attention to scale advantage, and what size brings you, as far as advantages in the marketplace and being able to do better work for your artist partners and being able to have more cultural impact, you're going to not be successful. So we went down the path of, let's keep these distinctive, awesome, freaky gardens going and humming, but let's all share the same soil, the same water, the same sunshine.
Wow.
Let's create a community of equals and achieve scale advantage that way. And that's been our ethos.
That's amazing. That's great. But you are saying that officially there are no plans for a theme park, a secretly theme park. Is that what you're saying by the Disney reference? I think people would go to that. That's like Branson.
Yeah, no. My 3-year-old son would love us to go in that direction, but no plans for that.
What are the benefits? You were talking about scale a little bit. What are the benefits of being a group of labels?
Well, Chris was, describing it very early on when we first started. It made it easier for us to collect revenues from distributors, getting, Chris, you should describe some of those early growing pains, in the 90s.
Yeah, I think in the early years that we had kind of two things that were really driving us. One was trying to complete our kind of global map of distribution, having a distributor in every country. First in North America and Europe, and then and then in Southeast Asia and South America. And, as we were doing that, we really needed to have a diversity of titles, a lot of newness, and we needed a lot of fresh release in order to do that. And so working with multiple labels really helped there. Another thing that we were really obsessed with in the early days when we were doing CDs was trying to drive the cost of our CDs down.
I see.
Back then we weren't really we weren't very sophisticated marketers. We primarily, we were worked on our relationship with artists, on really kind of connecting and speaking their language and trying to figure out what their needs are. Manufacturing, the production aspect of it, and distribution. It was three real key things. And production was the primary cost. We didn't have a lot of other costs outside of production. And probably the first run of 1,000 CDs we did probably cost us $3-4 a unit.
Right.
And over the course of the next 5 years, we kept trying to be like, how do we get lower manufacturing prices? That was, and it was, every quarter we were able to drop, 5-10 cents here or there, by one, having more volume, to take to our vendors, to, finding the best vendors, pitting them against each other, et cetera, et cetera. And, the more volume we had, the lower our rates went. We started to we created a production company called Bellwether Manufacturing, and we started to handle the production for our distributed labels, which our secretly distribution family kept growing as we added more and more labels each year. And we were able to get very low rates. And so finding that was really critical in our first, I'd say, 5 years, maybe even 10 years.
I read that you were doing manufacturing in the early days. Were you actually did you have a plant, or that you were making duplicating CDs? How did that work?
Brokering. We were brokering.
Okay.
We were just basically taking all the volume of, the manufacturing needs of not only Jaguar and Secret Canadian, but all the labels we distributed, and, said, hey, plant, we can, all together guarantee you, 500,000, CDs to be manufactured. What can you do to help lower the cost for us? And it was a very competitive time among CD plants, and they, chased business that was aggregated in that way.
Right.
And that helped us, create that scale advantage that we then, shared with everyone we were, manufacturing for. It lowered everyone's manufacturing costs, and it also helped us with cash flow in those early days. We were able to benefit from having that cash flow through us for manufacturing.
Sure.
It was good in that way.
If this system has worked out, has there been thought about more imprints down the road? Like, is that something like to keep adding more labels, or to coming up with genre-based labels?
We talk about it all the time. And not so much. We daydream about developing new labels or partnering with existing labels. But I think the one thing that we have to keep balancing, that keeps us kind of on our that keeps us balanced,
mm-hmm.
is by keeping our release schedule really tight and focusing on quality over quantity.
Sure.
Label side, it allows us to give an enormous amount of TLC.
That's great.
To each project, and so even though we're very omnivorous in our tastes, and we can imagine doing many different things, we do try to keep it reined in, because we don't want to. We're very conscious of not having the quality of care per release go down. Even if it benefits our bottom line.
Let me ask you about the music. Yeah. I want to go back to the early and mid 2000s. I remember learning about Secretly Canadian because I was a huge Danielson Family fan back in the day. I remember associating that label with weird and more adventurous music, certainly not mainstream. It took a few years for that Sufjan style of music to become, Grammy nominated or Oscar nominated. Was it a struggle promoting intrepid music during that time, like back in the early and mid 2000s?
Struggle. I don't know. Well, it was always a struggle from our perspective at the beginning. I think because we were based in the Midwest, we had such low overhead. Right. We had such modest expectations for ourselves at the outset. We sort of, was lucky. We weren't really on the coast. We weren't sort of, buying into what labels should be. We were just kind of going where we naturally felt labels should be. And each time we had, each couple of years we had a new milestone of success that, just gave us greater and greater self-esteem and confidence. And, I think Danielson Family being connected with Secretly Canadian, contributed to that. Eventually, helping distribute Sufjan Stevens' label Asthmatic Kitty, mm-hmm. and that really contributed to Secretly Distribution's success. I think it was always hard work, but we kept on feeling, sort of stable and constant organic growth every step of the way. And so we kept on, contributing to our own self-esteem and confidence that we were doing something right. Mm. So it never felt like a struggle in the sense of, why are we doing this? We should quit. This is really hard. Maybe because we didn't really start from a place of great expectations.
Right. But do you feel vindicated at all now? Like as with Grammys and stuff, like there must be a little bit of that.
Not really, because it feels just like it's it's a cultural trend.
Right.
It's our other indie labels are enjoying those same sort of, that's not due to the work. It's like, there were also periods of time where indie bands refused, you were a sellout if you had a sync in a TV show or a commercial,
Yeah.
And then that changed. Like, there are big cultural shifts way beyond us that we recognize.
That's good. That's fair.
And we just try to do the best work. We try to do the best work possible within those, within that framework at any given phase.
Can you?
And for us, I was going to just say, for us, like, we've always viewed success as just being able to have more capability the next day. So, every day we wake up, or every year we start the cycle again of our work, and we have a little bit more capability, we have a little bit more resource, we have a little bit more impact, we have a little bit more expertise to support our artists. And that is for us been the constant measure of success.
Yeah.
And yes, it's in a way it affirms that we're doing something right when you do get that big recognition from the Grammys, or certain records really break out and the market says, "Hey, this is really a worthy cultural contribution. This is making an impact." That does feel good, but I think Chris is right. I don't know if it vindicates us. I don't know if we ever really, had a chip on our shoulder. Like, why aren't you paying attention to us?
Sure.
Sure.
Can you tell me how the secretly publishing works? Because that's also not necessarily artists on your labels. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We started off that way. I think in the early days, kind of going back to talking about synchronization in TV and film and ads and video games, we started to see a pattern that most of the sync placements that we were getting were a result of the work that we or our sync partners were doing label side. That publishers weren't really bringing in a lot of opportunity.
Okay.
A lot of new opportunities, because most of the publishers out there were very large.
Sure.
Their scale was too large. They had millions and millions of copyrights to look after. That was one note, and then there was another note that we were seeing a lot of the artists we work with didn't have publishing representation, and we're like, we could do this, and if we have a special emphasis on sync, any new publishing clients that we have that we work with that we don't represent master side as a label, we could maybe provide a real service, because synchronization, it was starting to really become a larger piece of the pie for artists. And so we're like, there's a window here. And so about 10 years ago, we started a publishing company. We started first we kind of built the infrastructure for our company by doing deals with artists that we were working with label side. And then after maybe 3 years of that, once we felt like, okay, we've got a good structure here, we can now go to artists that we don't work with otherwise, and we can represent them. And over the years, and the percentage of writers that Secretly Publishing represents that we also work with label side has gone down. And so, but yeah,
how has synchronization evolved over the past several years?
Well, it's gone through many waves, I think the latest wave, from the last 3 years is as streaming platforms have gone through a boom period, so have the number of shows and films that are being made. And so it feels like there's record number, they've probably grown tenfold versus like 4 years ago. The number of productions being made, maybe 20-fold. We have seen, a big trend that goes along with that, though, and especially as the independent sector has gotten to enjoy in a larger percentage of the syncs out there. The prices have gone down per sync as the quantity has gone up.
Yeah.
So those are two big trends, And now amid quarantine, a national quarantine, we we're dealing with a micro trend right now of production halting and sync.
True.
Syncs we're anticipating to be down considerably this year, but that's still in play.
Yeah.
And it's like it cuts both ways. So like not only are there going to probably be less synchronization licensing opportunities because productions are shut down, but there'll be more music copyrights in a distressed, economic situation, chasing after those smaller number of syncs that are possible, which means the price is probably going to go down if you're thinking about it from a supply and demand sense.
And there's more musicians at home making more and more music.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's been a problem. That's been a constant phenomenon for years now. Like, it is cheaper to produce music now than it has been before.
Right.
I still think that production companies want quality repertoire by quality frontline artists, and so I don't feel like Secretly Group feels the pinch from those kinds of music makers who are doing things cheaply in a jingle house kind of way or whatever.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. Let me ask you about, we talked a little bit about the origins of the Bon Iver record and with Jag Jagger, and we talked about that with Eric a little bit, but there was still a little bit of gaps. I mean, specifically, I was reading about there was a CDR going around of his first record. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about how that came into the label and how that artist came onto the label?
Well, the CD that Justin and his manager at the time, Kyle Furnett, sent us went unnoticed.
Oh, okay.
Ended up in a
so he sent it to the label?
Yeah, he sent Forema, an early version of Forema, to the label.
Wow.
And I don't know which label it was addressed to. We found it maybe 9 months after we signed and started partnering with him. But where he ended up on our radar was on Brooklyn Vegan.
Okay.
To Brooklyn Vegan.
Okay.
Yes. They posted a few songs. I think it was Creature Fear.
Was it my old Kentucky blog, Chris? I can't remember if it was that or Brooklyn Vegan.
You know what? I think Eric.
It was Brooklyn Vegan.
Oh, Eric might have mentioned another blog where he had discovered it on, or that he had first heard it, but I can't remember what he had said now. Anyway,
okay.
Sorry.
I'm pretty sure Brooklyn Vegan.
I'm pretty sure that I first heard it on Brooklyn Vegan, started playing it a lot in the office, and we all, we're like, wow, this voice, these lyrics. It was really, really special, and we reached out. Justin and I had a few great conversations. Darius, you were up and, you could tell the story of you going up to Montreal.
Yeah, I was going up to Montreal to spend time with Spencer Krug from Wolf Parade and Sunset Rubdown, who we eventually worked with. And Chris was like, hey, you're in Montreal. Justin's in Montreal. You guys should have, connect and have a conversation. And we met outside of the Ukrainian Federation, which is this venue. There's a bar in front of it. I think we had a pitcher or two of beer, and we just talked forever. And it was, great. It was my first opportunity to hang with Justin and connect with him, and it was a great way to start our relationship.
Were there other labels approaching him at that time?
Yeah, he was talking to a few other labels, and I know that he went to CMJ somewhere in there. We had put in an offer. There were a lot of labels, a lot of very good labels interested in him. Pitchfork, I think, had already blown the album up just right before CMJ. He had a hectic CMJ. I think it was really stressful for him.
Right.
And he called us. I talked to him while he was sitting outside the venue of his last show and said, hey guys, I don't want to do this dog and pony show anymore. I want to do it with you guys. And we were ecstatic. It really felt like a big moment for us. Just to be like, wow, because at that. We were used to when you find the process of when bigger labels get in the mix.
Yeah.
Just all of a sudden we had our moment with this artist now. We didn't get it, you know? And this was a moment where it's like, oh, wow, he chose us. This is amazing, you know?
That's great. What made that?
Because we really felt the connection with him, you know, but we didn't know what sort of other connections there were being made, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and in hindsight, you know, and maybe we felt this at the time too, is why it was so easy for Chris to communicate with Justin and why I had that amazing conversation with Justin. Like, in hindsight, our values were very aligned as far as, you know, our Midwest identity, how we thought of approaching, you know, contributing to culture, making music, getting music out there. And so I think there was just a natural affinity for each other that we didn't have a vocabulary for at the time. But probably that's what contributed to Justin's gut, like, hey, this feels like home to me.
Yeah. Do you recall, like, I mean, looking back now, what do you think it was that made that record so successful? Was it the right place at the right time, or do you think there was? Have you thought about that at all?
I think it's two things. One, the quality of the song and the production and the voice. But then it's a triumph of storytelling, you know. And I think a lot of that. Not only was it intrinsically a great story, but it was the way the story was told was so great. And I think a lot of that credit goes to Justin's first manager, Kyle, who really, I think he penned that first bio. And with, you know, the cabin in the woods story, and it was told so succinctly and economically, and we had never seen a story told that resonated so clearly. You know, that's a story that people will still be telling in 30 years from now, you know?
Yeah.
Just that cabin in the woods.
Well, actually,
getting over from a breakup and an illness and a band breakup also, you know.
Oh, totally. That story is used by publicists will say when they're working with an artist, they're like, we need a story to go along with this album. For example, Bon Iver, Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
The best part of the Bon Iver story, and I was, you know, I've been following along with, as everyone has, with his career. The best part of that story is how he not only avoided the sophomore slump with his self-titled, but he completely exploded after that record. And that you just don't see that. There's so many times you have that sophomore slump, but he completely avoided that. How much pressure were you feeling following up for Emma? Was that an exciting time, or was that a stressful time at the label?
Both?
I wasn't stressed. Were you stressed? I mean, I think the minute we heard it, we were like, oh,
we're okay.
This is amazing. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Well, it wasn't stressful directly for the release. I think when we heard the record, we were excited. We knew, you know, I think we felt very good about how it was going to be received. And we weren't stressed about whether we could rise to the occasion and do good work with Justin. I think what was more stressful was, at the time, our company was growing immensely, and we were just adding staff. We were, you know, revenues were growing to levels where, you know, our older systems weren't really accustomed to it. There was just a lot of, you know, it was sort of in a sense like, you know, what was, you know, started as a you know, true mom and pop, you know, operation where we kind of grew up all of our systems ourselves. I think we were for the first time starting to be perceived as a successful business outside of just the Midwest. And that just brought a lot of pressures that weren't pressures we were used to. We had to sort of start being more professional in some ways. So it was stressful in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it also creates pressure too. Like when you have, you know, stories of like, oh wow, this record sold this much in this amount of time, and you know, and it raised this much money, and you have employees, you know, in the Midwest, you know, making, you know, what were hopefully reasonable salaries at the time, but you know, we were still not very profitable. We were still scraping by. It kind of created those pressures that we didn't really have, you know, a good rhythm of like talking about like, hey, you don't understand, a lot of that money that's flowing in for all those record sales, a big portion of it's going to, pay for marketing it, and a big portion of it is going to the artist. And we're not swimming in buckets of gold doubloons here,
How did that success with Bon Iver affect the A&R process moving forward? Was there more pressure, or did it make things a little easier?
I think we always were putting a lot of pressure on ourselves from an A&R standpoint. I feel like we were always trying to, our goals A&R wise were always elastic,
Okay.
And constantly we were, trying to level up. I think we were taken more seriously, and we were able to get in. We were able to get into conversations or stay in conversations that would have otherwise graduated beyond us prior to Bon Iver. He was a proof of concept,
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And and so that was nice, and it gave us an opportunity to be a little bit more extroverted, At that time, we were still very much a Bloomington, Indiana company, with the exception of our London office. We were, very much. We took great pride in being landlocked and doing it outside of a major market, doing it in a small college town. We took great pride in that, and we were starting to, stick our head out of that, out of Bloomington a little bit more.
Right. Is there, philosophically speaking, is there a mission statement or a North Star you try to follow when you're searching for artists to be a part of your label?
We look for iconic voices, artistic voices.
Yeah.
Not always, in the vocal cords,
Sure.
But, some sort of artists who have a distinct artistic voice, who have something to say. Artists that we're not going to feel compelled to go in and try to, do a makeover. Artists that we're going to trust. We have a pretty soft touch A&R philosophy. We find artists that we are going to do work that we're generally going to want, that we trust. And that doesn't mean we're not involved in creative conversations, but we're not in there trying to be like, okay, how do we get the artist to do this?
Yeah.
That's not our style so much. And then we also, I think, in the last few years, we've started to really look for to work with partners that not only are really making beautiful music, but also that maybe have some extra musical qualities as well. That they're where they're able to express things through other mediums as well. I think that's a common thread in the last 4 or 5 years.
Sure. We have so many listeners. I don't want to take too much of your time here, but we have so many listeners who are in the early stages of running a record label or are dreaming of starting a record label. Can you speak to them for a second? What would you tell them, or even what would you tell yourself back in the '96, if you could, about what to expect or how to begin your label?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know what. Chris, what would we have done differently, knowing what we know now?
That's a good question.
Think about how you create catalog numbers. I don't know.
That's great.
Because what you start, the road you start down is you're stuck with forever.
That's right.
We were real sticklers for systems.
Okay.
In the early days, I think it really helped us. I think when you have 5 partners, once Darius came on board, there's a moment there where when we were at our peak where we had 5 partners, we had to create systems in order to, not undo things that someone else had done.
Yeah.
So we were big on creating systems so that we could maybe scale what we do. I think that was critical.
Sure.
To our growth. Try to create create systems. But then also, I think the systems were critical to our growth. But then at certain points, when those systems become dogma, and I mean that in a pejorative sense, if you get too dogmatic and don't find ways to innovate your systems as the industry or the culture shifts, then you may be trapped by your own system,
Yeah. No, that's true, but it is
That's pretty general.
No,
but, I mean, we created systems and we wrote down the systems. Don't just create the systems, write them down. And that way, when you get your first employee, your second employee, then you have turnover and whatnot. You're able to actually, you're able to have a living. The systems can grow and optimize and whatnot.
Well, I imagine
it's
it
boring.
Can be independent.
It's not the fun stuff to talk about.
I imagine it allows things to be independent of you guys. You can go on vacation without everyone freaking out.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think another really valuable thing is just, in the first few years of starting a label is go on tour with an artist.
Oh, okay.
Go on tour with a band.
Yeah.
Because I think because we did that in the early days, you're like, oh, wow, this is hard work. This is hard. It's often thankless. And you can really understand, like, you could have 20 great shows in a row, which is like unprecedented, You can have 5 great shows in a row where you're just like, then all it takes is one show just on a relative scale, not as exciting as the last one. And all of a sudden the crash is hard, and, and to really try to understand what musicians that you're working with go through, the risks that they take in order to put themselves out on the line every day. And, it's a big deal, and if you can't relate to that or empathize with that, it's going to be much harder to, I think, be able to serve the artists you're working for.
Yeah, I think that was definitely one of the best ways I've learned about how to be a better label or be part of a better label. Was, Chris and I, we switched off duties being tour van driver and tour manager for Black Mountain when they're chasing Coldplay. Chris did a lot of touring with Jason Molina. I played booking agent for a second. Our other partners, Ben and Jonathan, they went on the road with artists as well. I think Chris, that's actually a great suggestion on the first thing to prioritize.
That's amazing. Guys, thank you so much for doing this. Congratulations on such an incredible group of labels and such incredible success, but also your impact on the industry and the people like myself who admire you guys and admire your label and admire your artists. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that. You can email me at podcast@otherrecordlabels.com if you have something you want to share or some good news that you want to share with all of us. And we've also put together a Facebook group, and it's now like over 300 people who are involved with labels and DIY artists, not just label people, but mostly label conversations happening over there. And you can get a link to that at our website along with all of our other resources. Make sure you check out Secretly Group if you haven't already. I know you have, though, and they're great labels, and of course the great artists and releases on their label. Thanks so much for listening.